All right. What's up, everybody? CJ Maurer here with the Finger Quotes podcast. I say
Love it.
finger quotes because it's not really a podcast yet. Maybe it will be someday. Right now, I've just decided that I miss people. I like connecting with people. I've long liked the idea of doing a podcast, but I don't really feel like spending the time to develop some strategy or even name it yet. Right now, I've just decided to have some interesting conversations with cool people. And that's why I'm really excited that tonight I am joined by Brian Grunert. Brian is the principal, one of the partners at a really great design studio in Buffalo, New York called White Bike, as
Yep.
it is affectionately called. Brian, what's up, man? How's it going?
Not much. I'm in the same boat as the entire planet is right now. Trying to make sense of the isolation and trying to be a business person at the same time. But I can say, thankfully, at least in the immediate, no worse for the wear. Things are doing just fine, and I'm glad to be on, is what I'll say.
The Finger Quotes podcast.
Finger Quotes podcast, for sure.
How are you holding up?
I'm doing fine. I think that, when I started White Bicycle, I was just a sole collaborator. So there is a bit of an echo of like the first 6 months or 8 months of White Bike where I was in, complete isolation. But yeah, I mean, it's the same spectrum as everybody. So far, my complaints are totally minor and manageable. In the family, we've been watching our daughter navigate senior year of high school. So that means making college choices without the ability to go and visit and, actually experience some of the places she's been accepted to. So that's been an obsession of ours. But, White Bike, is a team of 7 of us working remotely, or making that transition was no big whoop at all. But keeping in touch and starting to, figure out, there's really been some kind of cool discoveries, the forced evolutions that everybody is talking about. I mean, there are, many ways we've actually been managing to stay in closer contact with one another. But like everybody, like every small business, I don't even think we've entirely taken stock in, some of the hits that, our bottom line has taken. And, I think we are, preparing like everybody to charter some pretty weird, waters on the other side of this, whenever that actually ends up being. So, under those circumstances, healthy and nervous and happy and, otherwise, I'm just trying to keep track of what day it is.
Yeah, the days do kind of blend together. The parts of the day, in addition to the days themselves, right?
It's the weird combination of stuff feeling like it is moving glacially slow and extra fast at the same time. I don't know if there's a word for that, but it is pace seems to be rather confused under the circumstances. But yeah, generally speaking, you have to be self-disciplined always. So that hasn't been a big issue. And I think there has been a bit of a rhythm to this too, where I think everybody, our clients, our collaborators, our team was just trying to keep their wits and try to figure out exactly what the F is going on, at the very beginning of this period. So that first half of March, or that first couple weeks in this situation. And now things seem to be sort of sometimes reluctantly but steadily returning to some kind of normalcy, where I think people are realizing, oh, well, we don't have a choice to hibernate on things we used to do, etc. So yeah, it's an interesting mix. I think that I'd file that all under the how we're doing, same as everybody, and, unique at the same time.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I ran my mouth like an idiot for years saying that I was going to build a vegetable garden, like for years, right? Because I love the idea of it and I always wanted to do it. But you know, admittedly, I've always found a reason to spend my time doing something else.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I kind of looked myself in the mirror about this and about other things and said, the world is kind of giving me an opportunity right now. And if I don't take it, I'm just a chump who likes to
Yeah.
say he's going to do things and not really do them. So this weekend I
But you
actually
are,
finished.
I mean, who isn't a chump that says the things that they want to do and doesn't actually do them all? Nobody does
Oh,
them all.
I'm chief
Yeah.
chump right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
But in this instance, I built a vegetable garden this past weekend. It looks
Good
great.
on you. That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I'm
Now
glad
it
you can
needs
answer
like
that.
3 yards of dirt and some seeds, but yeah, it looks
If
great.
it's any consolation, I can tell you with a surety that I'm going to be the guy who does not advance his own personal lot in life at all. Like I won't be writing a book. I'm not going to get in COVID shape. I feel like, actually it's been interesting. It's been a different, it's been an opportunity to concentrate on work in a different way. This will feel like a setup for our conversation. I don't mean it in that way, but Kyle, my business partner, and I had connected on the 12th of March, which is, as I've been saying, like, just hours before the shit hit the fan blade, so to speak.
Yeah.
And we had connected to do for White Bicycle a mission and vision and really just kind of the strategic planning session that had been, kind of a layover from the end of last year. And something we've been really just struggling to get to actually spend some patient time with one another, and talk about some stuff that was big picture and, break it down into some little pictures and things. So it was really a sort of fortuitous timing that we would have that conversation and then be forced to, really look, sort of as everybody look existentially at the business. And the cool discovery was finding out, the hunches that we were sort of refining together were more applicable, and we're sort of felt like had arrived just in time because I think just the sheer sort of tumult and panic of it would have probably kept us from being, sort of clear-eyed or sort of, I think maybe a little bit more creative about the way we were ultimately looking at the business and some things we wanted to do structurally. And so with that in place, just barely in place, it's been cool. We've been sort of, building on those premises and, slowly but surely, the last couple of weeks have been trying to bring the team into that conversation. So, for me, that's my vegetable garden at this point, is some sort of business and strategic planning, the kind of foundations to maybe a crisper, better business plan that, just like everybody else, we're going to need particularly sorely in the next little bit. We're going to have a pretty aggressive plan. So we'll obviously, be able to calibrate it to the moment, but the core elements of it sort of snuck in under the wire, so to speak.
You used a phrase a couple of minutes ago that I thought was very simple yet kind of profound: forced evolution.
That's been like a theme for us. Like if we're a small, group of people saying that, I've heard other people say it, but that has become sort of a theme for us, and I'm sorry, I sort of talked over your question there, but I got excited about it.
No, I'm certainly not crediting you with coining the phrase, but I would say everything that you've described is very emblematic of the forced evolution. And one of the things that I often think about, and I don't really have the answer, is like, when we look back on this, however many years from now, how are we going to describe the time? On one hand, it seems very, there's the whole idea of like evolution versus revolution in terms of how to view change, right? And on one hand, like the way this kind of came about was just very sudden and dramatic and widespread, just
sure,
right? But at the same time, if you look at the ripple effect of the changes that are happening, if you're looking at like remote work, everyone's had to shift to remote work, right? The ways businesses have had to pivot to offer services to their customers or to stay in touch with their community, right? Online, remote-based services, teaching, coaching, things like that. The way they've had to lean on technologies to stay engaged, provide value. These are trends that had been happening, that have been emerging for years leading up to this. So one of the things that I think about is, are we going to look at this time, look back on this time and say, oh, that was when, we got slapped in the face and headed in a different direction? Or was this just the totally unexpected and unwanted and uncomfortable push to move us to the place where we were kind of already headed? What's your take on that?
I think it's, as best I can tell, it's entirely both of those. It's all of both of those possibilities. For the reason I was so excited about forced evolution, and this is just because you would know what I'm talking about because you know me, we've met. Getting off the dime, getting sort of some positive inertia is something that, as a business person, especially as anybody who's sort of really concentrated on doing the stuff that they need to do, the working in the business part of it, the force to get, a different initiative moving forward is really, it's pretty dramatic. It needs to be fairly dramatic. So this notion of forced evolution for us was, because of the circumstances, because of, both positive and negative inertia, when you see parts of your business slow to a halt, you can maybe activate some others, and when you see the world sort of, slow down and give you a really good snapshot, you can get some clarity in the moment. So for at least, me as, one of the leaders in our business, for me, it was an opportunity to say, this is getting positive inertia. This is going to force us into some action. But then I think the other point that you're making, this idea that I don't want to say nothing will be the same. For those who don't know what we do, we're essentially a branding team. We're a studio, by sort of description, but we are, sort of on the 50-yard line between, brand design and advertising agency. So in that spectrum, I think you can consider the types of things we do stand to be rethought, whether it's for the period of time that it takes for folks to recover, or maybe longer. I think the conversations that we've been having with long-standing clients, they're talking, quite certainly about the same things that you and I are talking about in terms of forced evolution. Yeah, this is allowing us to, really push ourselves in a direction that may not be, reliant as much or even at all upon, the kind of work that we're doing. So we have to sort of discover new relevance and, I think take a good look at the sorts of services and, products and the sort of consult that we give our clients and think, this stuff's going to be different, very different on the other end. So I think it's not just, the push we need. I think it's also, a pretty good indication that things are just going to be different, and I hope in a positive way, more generally, as a society, as, community of friends and, also, I guess, within our business too.
Is it appropriate for me to ask you if you could share any examples of how you guys as a business are changing what you're doing?
I think one thing, marketing, branding, that stuff makes sense to a lot of people and is very important. We don't often need to compel people to say, oh, you really should be minding your own brand. I think we live in a culture where people really understand that more and more. Like, I think that is something people get inherently. I would think, spending a lot of time on it and, actually, creating projects that kind of, curate your brand in a meaningful way, if that expression sounds right. those may be considered luxury items for a little while. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people are going to say, well, how are we going to, kind of restore just our own offerings, whether that's, like, an art center that we're working with, or a record label that we're working with, or a law firm that we're working with. Everybody's going through sort of unprecedented, set of challenges. So the stuff we do may be considered a bit of a luxury item. I think there's a part of it is like, well, can we start to bring that down to earth? Can we look at our own offerings? And as we see the world shifting, back into motion, can we offer a more streamlined version of the things that we've done? Something that makes it easier for somebody who needs to pivot their brand, from the current state, which is by all measures a mess, to, the future state, which will be a different economy for a long time, if not forever. That's certainly the speed, the efficiency, the, sort of agility that we have is something we're, talking about in terms of just, repackaging the things that we do and sort of looking at the, the sort of the way we provide them. But I think also too, this is an opportunity for us to even look at some of the offerings that, have been stones in our shoe. I think that as a team, we have been, adept on the content side in social media and, on the digital side. We see this as an opportunity to maybe, start to widen our skill sets a little bit and be a little more competitive in other ways. On purely the client side, I think we've also, just been bending to realizing, that there's a different way to, kind of, prioritize the communications work that we're doing with folks, whether that means, a little bit of invest the time now and, defer the payments until later, or whether it's something a little bit more subtle, like just understanding, maybe different priorities. I can tell you something that I would offer freely. For all of our clients, we've put forward this concept of putting a doubt board forward. I'm not sure if that's self-evident, but essentially it's, can you prognosticate, based on your understanding of the audiences that you're engaging with, some of the fresh barriers that they're going to face on the other side of it? So for instance, if it's an art museum, what's going to be the barrier to people returning to an art museum in the way that they used to? It could be on a membership level. They don't have the discretionary income that they used to say, yeah, I'm going to support these guys. Or if it's on just, gathering in crowds to, to really appreciate things, if they're not ready to do that, maybe there's some more permanence to the way that, a lot of the digital experiences that are emerging, sort of stick around, et cetera. So, to put a doubt board forward for your brand and say, what are the new, the new sort of, kind of hangups or resistances or doubts that we're going to face, or our audiences are going to be bringing to us, for no other reason than as you're planning communications moving forward, you can be a bit more proactive in realizing what challenges you're going to be facing on the other side of, of the current circumstances.
Yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me, so some friends of mine run a swim school in Atlanta, Georgia. They're two brothers. Both of them were Division I swimmers in college. One of them was one of my teammates at St. Bonaventure. Gotcha. So they run this swim school in Atlanta, Georgia since I want to say like 2012, and it's very successful, and they've done well, and they've thought about opening some other locations, and I'm not sure they totally ruled that out, but what actually they've decided to do is, and they actually started this about a year and a half ago, they started investing their time and resources to build out a separate business, which is online DIY, teach your kids how to swim at home. It's like all of these incredible video tutorials. It's like a full legit course.
In water and out of water, or is it all, do you have to have a pool to?
Yeah, you have to have a pool.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could go to a public pool. Like it's basically like really detailed stuff, and you can either bring a computer or bring a phone there with you, or just like practice in advance. If you have a pool at home, like it's an absolute layup, right?
Yeah.
So they also have a course for like adults. Like there's I was blown away by this, maybe just because my background, like spending so much time in the water, but 50% of adults in the US don't know how to swim. And it is either due to, you don't
I
know
mean,
how
I
to
can
swim.
survive, but I would love to actually know how to swim. But yeah, sure.
So that, like, a lot of it is just like fear of the water. Some of it is just like lack of access and things like
Yeah,
that. But a lot
yeah.
of it is fear of the water, right? So they're
Total
operating
lack of total lack of buoyancy. It might be
lack of
the issue.
buoyancy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And so like they're rolling this out right now, and it's such an incredible time because um, you use the phrase of you kind of talked about how this is like things are moving glacially slow and incredibly fast at the same time. That kind
Yeah,
of dichotomy, right? So right now their swim school in Georgia is closed, but they're about to launch this product that
sure.
some would think that maybe they scrambled right over the last couple of weeks to put this together, to maybe generate some revenue during this time when their school is closed. They've been actually spending time, like I said, over the last year and a half. And it's so interesting because the circumstances that are probably the worst possible, this time is the worst possible circumstances for their business school.
Yeah, they fit in a
Maybe,
category of you don't want to go in a pool and you don't want a massage therapist touching your body and you don't want to go to the dentist.
well,
There's so many.
worse than that,
Yeah,
they're legally not even allowed to be open.
yeah, right, right. I mean,
So,
and will be probably one of the latest to come back online. Things like that. Getting in
well,
big
things
cars.
in Georgia might be. I literally just read an hour ago. I saw on Twitter that the Georgia governor is announcing in 1 week a bunch of businesses are going to reopen,
For
and
sure.
then, or like this Friday, and then a week from today, another round. So I don't really know.
Yeah,
I didn't read the article or anything, but so who knows? Every state might be different. But
of course, of
what's
course.
interesting is how the circumstances are the worst possible for their school, but perhaps the best possible for their online school,
Sure, sure.
because everybody's home, the kids are home, they're bored, we're in front of screens, and the weather is getting nicer. Believe it or not, there are parts of the country right now where it is actually pool weather, right?
Sure, right, right.
And when I think about something like this, like a lot, you've seen slowly, right, more businesses integrate what I would consider like a half step between
Right.
not doing business with them at all and like their main bread and butter business model, right? You pay more for in-person swim lessons with an instructor than you would for a monthly subscription to videos that teach you how to do something, right?
Sure, sure.
And one of the things you mentioned, the art gallery, right? How are they going to get
Yeah,
people to come back? What if there's this weird in between time where businesses are allowed to reopen, but there's still a lot of cases and people are scared? But you know what? Maybe it's still an opportunity to engage people with the arts. Could
yeah,
there be a
yeah.
monthly subscription where a couple times a week you have somebody from the museum going around, talking about a piece of art, talking about the style, the artist, history, influences, what they were
Yeah.
trying to convey, start a group conversation. Maybe you invite them into a private Facebook group or a Slack channel, and there's some type of monthly subscription. In other words, realizing that we can still enjoy the things while confined to our
Sure,
physical
sure.
barriers. These things that previously I would consider like a half step, right? Now could end up being like the main revenue producer, because the thing about that is it doesn't face the same limiting factors. It's not like restricted to whatever capacity can fit into the building. It's
I
not
believe
restricted.
forced evolution is what we're
Forced
talking about.
evolution,
Yeah,
right? And something like that is incredibly scalable, right?
yeah,
Because
no doubt,
you're not
no doubt.
restricted to how many people can be in there, hours of operation, things like that.
Sure, sure.
You know,
I think what's exciting to me as a brand communicator and as a somebody who actually just geeks over the notion of kind of differentiating positioning and really kind of trying to find the unique truths about a brand, and turn that around and make it accessible to people. I think that what my spidey senses are telling me that even for, say, the swim school that's going to have a different sort of, maybe even see the flip in their proportion of their business, which is done in their pool versus that which is done online. And, that seems like a big shift. But I think that this is a grand clarifier for what is true and important about the brand, your brand, the museum brand, the swim brand, whatever. It actually is a, real clarifier and a focuser that the things that were true heading into this are more true now. Things aren't really changing. They're just they're just getting a much more, clarified, sort of framing. And I think, ultimately that has to do, I think, as much with what's actually important about the brand to the audience more than anything. The truth being, people just want to learn how to swim, and that's something that progresses regardless of whether it's almost like the hairstyle thing that's become a joke. Is can people get to their normal barber, hairstylist, or salon, etc. It's not because they're so worried about doing business with that person. It's that their identity kind of has absorbed this very physical, consistency, and it's being really pretty disrupted. It's not the hair salon's brand that they're looking to patronize. It's their own brand that they're looking to kind of maintain, even though things are, going sideways.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's very true about, whether it's the art museum or whatever, people will always want to be inspired. People will always want to feel as though they are connected with, other folks who are appreciators or enthusiasts or, essentially experiencers of the arts. And that's the cool part, that never changes. The distribution methods can change, the number of people out in the gallery at the same time can change, but the real truths of the brand, the audience's truths about that brand, that stuff is actually becoming, in sharper relief. And that, I think, would be, from where I sit, the encouragement to anybody who's running a business or trying to, sort of advance a brand, a concept of any kind, is if there was real value to it before all this, that value cannot be eroded. It will actually, you just have to find a new way, or maybe at least temporarily find a new way to, allow people to access it.
Yeah, people want the same things. I don't feel like any different of a person right now than the person I was, on March 11th or 12th.
I mean, except for the fact that you have a vegetable garden that you couldn't say before all this. So you are.
And a finger quotes podcast.
Yeah.
Forget about that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think, change is a finicky thing, it can be dramatic, and impermanent, and it can be subtle and permanent, so I think it'll be interesting. I think everybody is going to be changed. How permanent those changes, how dramatic those changes, it's really going to depend, but I think at the core, people are going to still, like you're suggesting, people are going to sort of still be turned on by the same things, I was thinking about the other day, this is free, I'll never do it. This is one of those things I would put in my list. When a digital music distributor can get a better sense of how to mimic the flipping of records in a bin, if there's any way they can kind of get, the phone to emanate a bit of a musty attic smell, then I won't need to go to the record store anymore. But until they manage that,
I was literally, one of the things that I was literally planning on asking you, because you acknowledged earlier that we know each other, we're friends.
We've met.
On at least one occasion, I have ran into you at a record store.
Which means you've been in the record store not as much as me, because you can see me there most Fridays or Saturdays.
Right. So you probably have seen me at I don't know, 40 to 50% of my visits to the record store.
Sure.
You have seen me. I have seen you at maybe.
That's fine. I presume that percentage will continue to go up as we continue to
Right.
go.
Absolutely. I've seen you at 0.5% of your visits to the record store, if that. So what I was wondering for you is, what is the worst part about this whole situation for you? Is it not being able to go to the record store, or everything else combined?
I think that, I think that I would be a dick if I didn't say the truth, which is seeing so many people struggle in really profound ways, knowing a couple people who've been touched by sickness and stuff, that is really tough. I will say without hesitation that the toughest thing for me personally has been that this has been happening against a political backdrop that makes absolutely no sense to me, and I won't even get into political persuasions to simply say our political system is so wrought with just short-sightedness and, just wrought with illogic, it just defies anybody who's paying attention, to say, yeah, this makes sense. None of it makes sense at all, regardless of which side of the aisle you find yourself. So to know that this is going to have such a profound effect on such an important election cycle for the United States, to me is just, that's the insult, to all the injury people have been feeling. Personally, on a real, like to me, my escapes, going to the record store on a weekly basis and talking to the people that I've made friends with at Revolver and stuff, that to me has been a missing piece. I really like that. So I've been replacing that with walks. Walks are a pretty decent substitute. You can still listen to music. But yeah, there was something ritualistic about that. That was a ritual for me. I was a, one night a week hockey player, so.
You're a goalie, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So, that's been a pause. We got together as a team online and, hung out not unlike this just to, shoot the shit. And yeah, those little snippets, you can kind of get, sort of proxies for that stuff. But yeah, again, I think all my complaints relatively pale in comparison to some of the big ones out there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, for sure. I hear you on that. And yeah, it's very unfortunate. And I think it's very admirable that you're seeing a lot of people just reach out and contribute in whatever way they can.
Yeah.
Whether that be making masks or, dropping food off, or even just like holding up signs outside of, healthcare facilities and hospitals and things like that. You're really seeing the good in humanity. And sometimes it's unfortunate why it takes compromising circumstances to bring that out. But on the other hand, it does kind of make sense. Yeah, that absolutely is a big deal. I've been following the news with confirmed cases and deaths and things like that. Unfortunately, I know a couple of people who have already passed from.
Yeah, I it's starting to, here in Buffalo, and I'm sure, the more you have, friends that are in other cities and things, the more likely you might be in the pathway of things like that. But it does feel like it's sort of creeping into our inner circle here in Buffalo. You're just hearing more and more, friends and stuff that are, that are actually dealing with it, so yeah, that part is really just sad. And, ultimately, I think what I'm hearing you describing is this kind of like, collective empathy thing. I do think, certainly, I don't think it's fair to draw comparisons, but, like when you consider what we as a country went through at different points during what feels like unending wars, but really the trigger of that being 9/11, like there is this sort of collective empathy and in it togetherness that feels part of this. Although right now this feels like, yeah, I think maybe we're more aware of each other's frailty and vulnerability, whether that's, financially or whether that's emotionally. I think some things that were kind of becoming all right might be more all right, just admitting you have, some blind spots and stuff. But I think that's good for everybody, forced evolution. I think that things start to, come forward in a way that maybe is silver lining type of stuff, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I think again, I hope that, the good changes are the permanent changes, and that the unfortunate changes are the fleeting changes, but it doesn't always work out that way.
Of course, at the same time, you have people in Michigan, like driving in the streets and protesting, saying they want businesses reopened. And,
yeah,
there's that too. You can't forget about that.
I'm all for freedom of speech, and I'm all for that freedom of expression.
Totally. And to be honest, guess what? I want businesses to reopen too.
Yeah.
I really do too. I have a hard time.
Is there a point? Like an honest question for you. Isn't there a point at which you might just say, yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna go back to work. I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna do these things. I just felt like my wife and I went grocery shopping yesterday, and just the sort of stress of that endeavor was like, that was like sobering, you know. We
Yeah.
hadn't been in a few weeks, and it was like, man, that was really stressful, you know.
Yeah.
And life shouldn't be that stressful in the most mundane, ways. So I wouldn't mind things going back to normal, but
I
I mean,
totally
I
want
think,
things to go back to normal. I
yeah,
absolutely do.
like, but I don't think at the same time, um, look, I'm a red-blooded wuss. I don't want to get coronavirus if I haven't sneakily already had it. So, and I
Yeah,
don't
no,
want
totally.
to get
And
it
that's the
either.
thing, like I have a hard time understanding how the layperson, you and me, could really have a strong opinion about how soon we should or shouldn't open everything back up. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
if you haven't spent your life studying like medicine and infectious diseases and public health, how could you legitimately have the opinion on whether it's the right? You know what I mean?
I
Whether it's
do.
the right time or not?
I do. I mean, I think that feels like, the crux of it. Um, I guess what I would say is, uh, I've been rolling in my brain, when is it tasteful enough to say other things that feel rather viral in a negative way? And concepts like apathy and complacency being a virus in and of themselves. I find myself in the awkward position of disagreeing with the reason why those people are mobilizing, and yet really believing that mobilization on any level is just a good thing. Like what I wish we heard, and what I wish we had more of an access from the comfort of our own homes. What I wish you saw more of, and I don't mean to say that I don't like the unity of whether it's commiseration or real empathy for one another. I want that. I think that's a positive force. But I'd also like to see us more vocally saying, the system that delivered really a lot of maybe the unnecessary impacts of this situation is broken and, remains broken. I think you can look at it the same way. For me, just to get a little political, you wonder where the will would come from, like say after the 2000 election, when it'd be fair to say we had some electoral issues, you know what I mean, in terms of figuring out who won the presidential election. And yet I think 20 years later, you can safely say, yeah, not only have things not improved in that area, they've gotten markedly worse. We've done not only nothing to make that system stronger and more democratic. We find ranging from voter suppression to voter, or to, electoral, sort of, hijacking, a really broken system. And I think if the health care and health insurance systems are broken, yeah, man, I hope that we find a way to muster the will. And I would say, hey, look at our friends in Michigan protesting, being sequestered in their homes. Maybe there's a way that we can, more positively protest some of the things that must change to avoid the sort of circumstances we find ourselves in now.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would doubt it.
Political. I got political. Maybe this can be edited out. I don't know.
No way,
I feel
absolutely
comfortable
not.
saying that. I feel comfortable saying that, and I don't think that's really. Actually, I don't think that's a partisan statement at all. That's an American statement, and that's a statement around liberty. That what are we willing to just roll with, and what are we willing to sort of say, what, I really didn't like being quarantined. I think that if there's a way to sort of create a system that does a better job of avoiding something like this, that's what we should do. That's what I think we should do.
Well, part of it comes down to how much are we willing to tolerate? And I think that when you think about your point, mobilization is a good thing, and we should channel our ability and desire to mobilize around making more substantive, positive, impactful changes in our society, however that is, healthcare system,
I agree. Yes.
electoral politics, whatever, right?
Right.
But what is it going to take to get us there? You know what I mean? Like, I think we are a fairly complacent society, and I don't mean that so much critically, because I think when it comes to championing change, like on the spectrum of sitting on my couch and doing nothing to, like protesting on the grounds of the US Capitol, I'm not the most, active person there is, you know what I mean? So I don't say that so much, so that we're a complacent society in much of a critical way, because I think it's a byproduct of us mostly having a good life. I mean, look at when you think about what some of other people around the world and even our own society in previous generations had to endure: wars, Great Depression, other pandemics. Like, just think about some of the things that people in history have had to endure. And the fact that, a month in our homes, safe, with access to food, water, most of us, Netflix, TV, internet, whatever. If this is the thing that's like tipping the scale for us, we've had it pretty good. Right. So it's not totally unsurprising that, like, we haven't, channeled our energy to fix these problems. If it doesn't, they say all politics is personal, right? Like, if at the end of the day, if you feel okay with you and your lot, then there's not a lot that's going to motivate you to take action.
I mean, I would be serving your podcast well, this fledgling podcast, by saying, I mean, I think some of it comes down to just core communications. Like, I think that, when you talk about American values, and I'm not talking about, things we can all agree on, I'm talking about how those things actually distill down into, the kinds of things that we fundamentally agree on. I think that there's probably whether it's sort of a void in leadership, or whether it's, societal forces, the things that, sort of pull us away from some of those, core values. And again, I'm not talking about, those things in a platitudinal way. I'm saying the things that we agree on whether that's something in, the aggressiveness with which we want our elections to be democratic, or the aggressiveness with which we want, people's human rights to include things like guaranteed, access to health. I think that we haven't maybe had a good check-in in a while, and I think that's maybe what is sort of due. I think that it is kind of maybe those things are a bit more adrift, or maybe those things have become more expressions of people's sort of personal sensibilities than some collective sensibility, and that's it. I think that for the most part, the majority of people that I've met agree on a few things regarding this, this pandemic. And that's maybe a place to start. Is there any way to take, just this, hey, well, while we're agreeing on things, maybe we can work on a couple of other things. And I think that is the biggest frustration. I think that's what people are frustrated with, in terms of some of our, national leadership at this point, is, maybe the only difference is that we're not seizing the moment to actually find some things get, relatively more, sort of unified, take advantage of the fact when we're all on the same page with a couple of things. So yeah, I think that's something that is probably out of the reach of this podcast, but I'm glad we talk about it. And I do think that at the core of it, being able to communicate with each other and maybe plead a case with one another, where we don't resort to tropes, or we don't resort to lowest common denominators, is maybe where the things that you and I both do for a living do have something very directly to do, how you reach consensus on things.
Well, I'll say two things to that. One, there's that old adage, what is it, like, adversity is the mother of innovation, right? So I think it's very reasonable to predict that the adversity we're facing now will bring about some positive change, and because at some point people just have to say, what are we doing all this? Why am I holding this line? Why, you know what I mean? Why am I not more open to this or that or the other thing? And so even if the innovation you speak of are ideas that have been in circulation and under debate for a long period of time, they may not seem like innovation, but if it's an improvement from where we are right now, in however that's defined in whatever area of life, then that absolutely is innovation. And I actually am optimistic that this will result in a positive change for society. Maybe it's because generally I'm an optimist, but I'm already seeing how people and communities and businesses are responding. And to me, it's largely positive. So I am absolutely encouraged by that. Number two, we don't have to get into this now, but there is, as far as I'm concerned right now, I don't think there is anything off limits for this podcast, because there's a reason why I don't have a strategy or a name. No, truth be told, so like, obviously I run a marketing and growth agency, and whether it be for my own agency or for my clients, everything I do is usually well thought out, well planned. There's usually a defined strategy behind it. And when I had the idea, I had the idea to do this a long time ago, but when rubber finally met the road and I said, okay, let's do this, no more excuses, CJ, I started to give myself the normal, like, strategic treatment. And I just wasn't having it, because I realized at the end of the day, I just want to do it. I don't care how many. I would like for people to watch and listen, but I don't care if a ton of people do or don't listen. I quite frankly, I don't care if it produces leads for my business. I'm not even sure yet how associated I want this to be with my business.
Yeah, I make no promises. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
that's right.
The Grunert on this.
Yeah, you're really glad you agreed to this now.
Yeah, that's right.
But no, I just wanted to have fun.
Yeah.
I just wanted to have fun, and I thought to myself, that's why I didn't even have a name, because a name should represent something, and
sure.
I don't know what this is going to represent yet. And I feel like if I just do this, at some point, the theme, if you will figure itself out, and the name will become self-evident. And that's why I'm talking to people like you who are experts at naming things. So maybe I'll have you back for episode 37, and you'll just kind of, something will roll off the tongue, and that'll be it. And then you'll say,
I think it's interesting. You talked about, you said a couple things, and, I'm not sure it would be wrong of me to take a shit on your optimism that, that there will be positives to come out of this.
You can.
I think positives will come out of this, but I also feel like, I think cynicism is as opportunistic as optimism is. You know what I mean? And I think that that's why it's so important from where I sit. That's why it's so important to come to some fundamental consensuses on the things that we want to define our society, define our interactions with one another, define, what an American dream, sort of, actually means in this decade or in this generation. And I think that's it. If we don't define those, like, sort of core truths, core values, whatever you want to call them, I think then cynicism, it's like, cynicism is like water seeping into cracks. It just sort of finds the cracks and, gets in there and, does what water does, at least in terms of foundations and things. And that's what you think about things like, why do, really hyper, free market solutions start to creep in at this point. What we're going through would be just as valid a justification. I don't know if valid is the word I'm looking for. Would be just as likely a justification to do cynical things and turn our society away from equality and social justice as it would be a reason to do positive things. And I think right there, you're just talking about leadership at that point. What do people want? What do we demand from our leaders at this point? Who are we going to vote for? You know what I mean?
And here's a question
out of that person.
Here's a question about leadership. Do leaders point the ship and take society with it? Or does society anoint the leaders it wants based on the current state of affairs, based on the current spirit of the age?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think there are market forces, there are other forces that I think have been more compelling in terms of telling people, suggesting to people what the cooler, better, more American path is, whether it's the media or whether it's, sort of, the consumer currents and things like that. And I think that we don't demand enough from our leaders as a result. I think we kind of, these systems, or these sort of solutions kind of become, sort of a reflection of, hey, everybody wants, a cell phone plan, and everybody wants sort of the simple things. The thing I always remark is at how, I have this conversation with my father all the time, where it's like, I'll say the Sabres suck, and he'll say, why do you keep buying tickets? And I will say, well, because I want to be there when they don't suck anymore. I want to, I want to be, I'm basically betting on the fact that, this is their year. And it's that loyalty that sort of starts to become, the sort of force that turns a blind eye to, the fact that the stuff has become, economically unviable. It's just too expensive. So no offense to the Sabres. I mean, they're just one sports team, but the whole thing has become this thing where it's like, why don't we just stop? Why don't we stop doing that? I think that those kinds of, and I have my reasons, because my identity is sort of tied with, I'm the guy that goes to the Sabres games, maybe 15 or 20 times a year. And I'm going to do that, whether, I have to turn a blind eye to some other things or not. And I think that's true on the other end of things. I think if we found a way to have a real national dialogue, the kind of thing that would, bring referendums forward. If you ask every American, hey, do you think that, healthcare should be guaranteed by citizenship and paying taxes? I tell you, every single person, who's thinking, just about, the truth of it would be like, yeah, of course. Why not? Why wouldn't you want that?
Yeah.
I do think, if you don't mind me ranting a little bit, I do think this is an opportunity for communicators within those, political spheres to take ideas like, American exceptionalism, to take something where we say, cynically now, when America does it, it's right because America is the greatest. That's basically the version of American exceptionalism that I think we've kind of leaked into. Why not turning that around and saying, well, maybe our exceptionalism is the reason to do hard things. It sounds like Jack Kennedy stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe we take on things like, hey, we can't have universal health care or Medicare for all because of, the fact that it doesn't work perfectly well in this country or in that country. What if the posture change was, no, we can actually take those core concepts and improve upon them because we're America, because we are exceptional. When will things like American exceptionalism be the excuse for doing, very hard, positive things as opposed to selling ourselves short? That's my rant. But I also think that is where communications come into play.
I love that. You and I have
around.
Your point about American exceptionalism hits home with me. I love the point of when I look back. I remember when I was a kid, when I was like middle school, right? Like social studies and history, those were my favorite subjects. And one of the things that I really started to geek out on is, the history of the country. And I started to feel really proud of the decisions our leaders made at the time and how it charted the course of history and the things that we did. Not in spite of the fact that they were hard, but in some instances because they were hard. And it doesn't really feel like that anymore. I think one small recent example of that was it was what we saw with Andrew Yang. Now I never heard of Andrew Yang before. I would say fairly apathetic about him as a politician. Maybe he's great. Maybe you know what I mean? I don't really have strong feelings about him, but he came up with this idea of the universal basic income. And he said, you know what, guys, robots and artificial intelligence are taking our jobs away, and they're going to take our jobs away even more in the future. And we need to start thinking about this because here's a reasonable solution. Now, again, about the point of universal basic income, maybe it's a great idea. Maybe it's not. Honestly, I could be convinced either way. But you know what? I took a deep breath and I sat back and I just felt so refreshed that somebody was actually putting themselves out there to offer a legitimate solution instead
Yeah.
of like waxing poetic about like vague ad speak on American values without,
Sure,
just a
sure.
long walk for a short drink of water to say nothing. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And that
yeah.
that was
I agree.
really refreshing. And he's not the only one. Like we do have other leaders that have put themselves out there to offer new solutions. But
Sure,
um,
sure.
him putting himself out there and offering something new and different and innovative, right, felt
Yeah,
American to me.
and it felt like progress. I think progress is an American, is an American value as well. And I think when it feels that way, it's exciting. It does feel exciting. And I think that, I feel this. I feel the same way. I do think language is just a really important part of all of it. And I think you're right. You don't want to see, American political discourse and American, leadership boiled down to just catchphrases and sort of cynical concepts or sort of euphemisms of various kinds. But I do think there are words that have sort of been kind of slowly sort of twisted in terms of their meaning. I think even the word like a word that's I think, sort of important to me is just this idea of public education versus private education. When the concept of something being public, in other words, accessible and, sort of designed for the common good became a lesser than term, that public health and, the public library and public school started to feel like a lower rent version of something that was, either private, etc. And now I'm not suggesting for a second that everybody feels that way, or that everybody believes that's true. But I think you see discourse turning, some of those phrases on themselves, in the same way that you'd look at, a benefit or, frankly, a right turned into an entitlement, that kind of cynical perversion, of the way we look at things, I think can have an equal but opposite reaction, where you can start to say, I think it's time to challenge our leaders. When Bernie Sanders was running, it was important for him to defend his, political stripes by, suggesting hey, I'm a democratic socialist. And people wanted to dissect that brand of socialism that he was advancing. Take Bernie right out of it. When are we going to start asking our leaders, whether it's the current president or any of our candidates running or any of our senators, to actually defend what kind of capitalists they are? Start telling me what kind of capitalism do you actually espouse? Because capitalism is not an American value. Capitalism is just one half of a mixed economic system. And when you start to sort of twist this notion of a description of a half of our economy, one way that our economy propels, that is a emblematic of an American value, and that any concept that challenges that is in some weird way unpatriotic. That's when I think you get into trouble. That's when you get sort of a corporate version of capitalism that runs away, is when it becomes unpatriotic to question the limits of an economic system that really does only comprise one half of our American economy.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely sure that I've either driven your podcast into the ditch or totally
No, this is great.
Got it to the moon. But either way, I just wanted to talk to you, CJ. Whatever. I'll talk about whatever.
No, well, so I like that you, first of all, like when I reached out to you and said,
In hour 2 or wherever we sit now, you can't say first of all. That's not legal. There's no such thing as first of all at this point.
What are
like
we?
32nd.
We're a little over an hour in.
So 32nd of all.
Yeah. So yeah, 57th of all. When I reached out to you,
Yep.
I was expecting this kind of dialogue. I didn't know if you were gonna. I was not expecting the like shift toward politics, but I certainly welcome it and I enjoy it. What you said is just so thoughtful. I consider myself a capitalist. I am a business owner. I like capital. I like the
Yeah,
fact
me too.
of
Me
free
too.
market, right? But it's also fair to acknowledge that capitalism is kind of self-cannibalizing, right? Where if
Right.
like eventually like what happens is, you know, all of like money flows to the top, and you have and like there's a consolidation of power, you know, where the companies buy companies, and then there's only a couple of big companies
Sure.
left.
Sure.
And if the money keeps flowing to the top, then there's fewer people, you know, fewer people with money to profit on. And then where does that leave you? Right.
Sure.
But there's people who believe, when the people believe in capitalism, they say, well, it's the free market. It's capitalism is having a bunch of options and letting the
Sure.
market choose. But sometimes too much capitalism, where it all flows to the top, right, produces fewer options and undermines the vision of capitalism that most people have of capitalism,
Sure.
probably including our leaders, who
Right.
because they see capitalism and they want the same opportunity that you and I have, right? They
Right.
want
Right.
people to be able to start their own businesses, and if their product or service is good, right, they can grow and they can hire, and like all of this stuff is good. But there is a point, just like any other political ideology, I would argue, where too much of it is bad.
Right. And you know, you look at capitalism, and you think of, you know, look at every foundation, and you look at what the surplus from capitalism has been repurposed to serve, you know, in terms of just societal good. You know, capitalism is not inherently bad. I mean, I do think that the current version of American capitalism is so hyper focused on, you know, quarterly gain, at even the expense of, you know, anything even midterm, let alone long term.
Even the
Um,
quarter after it.
yeah, exactly. That kind of hyperactivity, you know, is sort of an unregulated version of capitalism. You know, when I talk about it sometimes with my, you know, my pinko friends, I mean, the fact of the matter is, I not only am I a capitalist and I am a business owner participating in capitalism, you know, I also am a socialist. And I look at, that's America. We are a mixed economy. We have, you know, capitalist forces and socialist forces that are both working in harmony. And I think right now you could look at the current circumstances and say, which parts of our economy are working better than the others? Is the socialist part working better, or is the capitalist part working better? And if maximizing the stock market and maximizing the quarterly gains is the objective of our economy, then you would say, well, gosh, man, capitalism is crushing socialism. But if stability and the preservation of access to opportunity and basic, you know, human rights and dignity is the metric, well, then I think that the socialist part of it is holding its own pretty well. Like I love capitalism, I also love dogs. Capitalism is a dog. If we put all of the food out for our dog, it would eat all of the food until its stomach exploded. And then when its stomach exploded, our other dog would come in and eat all the exploded remains of the first dog. That's capitalism on this sort of hyper quarterly, mode. I think, you know, socialists, democratic socialists or otherwise, will invoke, you know, FDR. I think they should be maybe invoking TR. We need more, you know, sort of bold regulation of the forces of capitalism that I think ignore not only long-term or mid-term, you know, sort of the stability of it, but also, you know, the sort of equality of it. I am not an economist, and, you know, I'm not trying to say that I've cracked this code, but I have this hunch that if you flip the pyramid and if you had some version of capitalism, you know, for the purpose of branding, you would call it like common good capitalism, or, you know, public capitalism or something like that. And if you fed, you know, the sort of bottom half first and made sure that our first $500 billion fed that part, and then you fed the middle class, I have this sneaking suspicion that everything I've heard, call it the, you know, super simplified, you know, sort of Henry Ford version of economics, that there would be more money than you could possibly imagine for, you know, the top 10%. You know what I mean? That stability that you bring to the economy from the bottom up would, you know, explode the sort of earning power to allow for wealth beyond imagination. And to me, that's the way you sort of let maybe the sort of, I'm not going to call capitalism a disease, but that's where you let the sort of, maybe sick part, sort of heal itself. You know what I mean? It's sort of turn it on itself. Oh, you want to figure out a way to, have capitalism serve everybody. And I don't know. I'm maybe out of my depth at this point. But I think I started this to defend myself. I'll say I started this by saying one of the toughest parts about being in this circumstance with the rest of our country and frankly the rest of the globe is to sort of watch, in kind of a daily unfolding, how our systems of government compare with one another and the job that they're doing, and just in terms of delivering, sort of basic equality, basic freedom, basic security. And it's perilous to have to choose leaders under these circumstances, for sure. I think it makes me nervous. I don't like the idea of it. And there's a lot of pressure on the two people who are running for president. I think we have a pretty good track record of how each of them might handle it. One's been president for 4 years, and the other was a senator forever and vice president for 8, and has a pretty decent track record of things too. So yeah, there you go. My hope is that and this I mean with all due respect to my Republican friends, I hope that Democrats get as good at the sort of language part of politics, the sort of euphemization part of politics, the kind of brand part of politics, as their counterparts on the Republican side, have managed in the last cycle, for sure. What else do you want to talk about, CJ? You want to talk about politics or something?
I think that, we've had several conversations. We've had several long conversations in your conference room, over the phone, at a bar.
Yeah.
I feel like I can remember one time before where we've discussed politics. So it was not totally on my radar that we were going.
Yeah.
I think this was super interesting, and I am so excited to publish this and see what other people think.
Well, I appreciate it. And, I think, the best we can do for one another is, during all of this is just shut up and listen. I got to talk a lot. I really appreciate being listened to. If any of your friends or clients or, circles, the folks you share orbit with listen to this, I would thank them too. If you get this far in it, you'll know I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you were very honest, right? Because I was expressing my optimism for the current state of affairs, and you kind of buoyed that with, I don't know if it was cynicism on your behalf or the potential cynicism of the collective, let's call it. And I appreciate that too, because even though I still maintain my original position that, I do think like this will, in the long arc of history, right, we will look back on this and see it as a catalyst for good. I do think it's very possible, if not likely, that things will get worse before they get better. Usually I feel like people need to experience more pain, before better outcomes happen. It's kind of like if you're in your house, right, and your house is on fire and you have to jump through a window to get out. You will not think twice about jumping through the window, even though that's an uncomfortable thing to do,
Sure.
right? But even if that thing was the best thing for you to do, I know this isn't the best example, maybe that thing was the best thing for you to do for 5 years, but you never wanted to do it because it was uncomfortable. Oftentimes we need to experience a lot more pain before we do that. And I just think it's really like, I'm doing a lot of listening, right?
Yeah.
And we all are. And I think a lot of us are just kind of like waiting and seeing what's going to happen. We're curious. But I also think this is a very significant time. And I think it's something that when my kids get older, my kids are 4 and 2, and then the third one's due at the end of September.
Hang on a second. I don't think I knew that.
You didn't know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, number 3, man.
That would be, cheers to you guys. And I hope everything not only under the circumstances, but under any circumstance. I hope that goes great for you guys.
Thank
Really.
you. Yeah, we're excited. We're very blessed.
Yeah.
So I think about this, right? And they're going to get older, and someday they're gonna learn about this in school, and then they're going to ask us what it was like to go through this. And
Sure.
I want to be able to tell them, but one of the things that I think is cool is that like maybe someday, like even if like this, I post this on YouTube, and in 15 years it has 32 views. My daughter gets to see like what my son and my kids will get to see,
Really interesting.
what was on dad's mind. And I think that's a really cool aspect of it. And when you're talking about your hope for American exceptionalism and
Sure.
evolution, be it forced or voluntary, right? Like I really identify with that too. But then when you think about how we're just two people in Buffalo, New York, on opposite sides of the city limits. You're in North Buffalo, I'm in South Buffalo.
Yeah.
Like I can't
born rivals. Yeah.
That's right. I can't help but feel somewhat powerless about the whole situation, right? And so like
that's interesting.
My mind immediately goes, well, what can I do? And as significant as this is to me, just showing up and putting stuff out there and just being present feels like a very healthy way for me to contribute, even in the most like minute, microscopic, insignificant way. But maybe it is just like the littlest bit significant. And it feels like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like I'm just being here in the moment and figuring it out as I go along. And if in the process, I could add some value or, make some connections for people, have some fun, I don't know.
Yeah.
Then this is all worth the while.
Yeah. I'm not searching for the last word here. Something you had said, like you were curious. I was describing, I think, this sort of insidiousness of cynicism as a force that, sort of moves in a similar way, as optimism. It sort of sneaks into the cracks. And I think, from my former lifetimes, whatever version of activism, or whatever I think depth of activism that I, expressed in those former lifetimes. And one thing I, learned, just take pacifism, take, nonviolent pacifism. It should not be confused with passivity, that being a pacifist is it's a duty. There's an active duty to that. And there is nothing complacent or calm or polite in pacifism. And I think that's probably my biggest sort of concern and aggravation when we go through something that is, just straight up stone cold grief inducing, like having something as mundane as our weekly trip to the record store taken away, or something as profound as a loved one taken away. When we're all going through seeing all of our hard work get threatened by this, when we see all of our, sort of family units being threatened by this, it's really dark and grieving. So the natural response, I think, is for everybody to come together. And I'm all for those moments. Like every night, our neighborhood at 8 p.m. goes out and rings bells. That's like the thing that we do to just show some solidarity. And I find that beautiful.
You guys just started doing that now, or were you doing it before?
No, that just started during this. So you can say, wow, what a beautiful thing. It's like really this poetic, lyrical, beautiful thing.
How did that start?
Text from one person to the other. Somebody heard an idea. It was like that rainbow thing that started and caught a little bit more fire.
Yeah.
It was just this thing where, and I think that there's like maybe 4 or 5 families that go out and ring bells at 8. And then we say, how you doing? That's it. I find that stuff to be heartwarming and important, but I think equally important would be to sort of say, well, let's not be tricked into, pacifism turning into passivity.
Right.
Let's look at the moment and say, no, now more than ever, we have to be super vigilant because, optimism creeps in, but so does cynicism, and those cynical answers, to where we ought to go from here. There probably are 2 opinions about whether we need less free market or more free market. And that's going to come down to, where is power invested? And we all know power is invested in, the free market. And so those, solutions have such an advantage. The only advantage that, the rest of us have is just sheer numbers, that's it. So, to me, I think I agree with you. It's so daunting to look at, well, how am I going to start this sort of private protest, and what movement can I join, and what force can I kind of, wield in this? And I think that's it. We got each other, man, me and you,
Yeah.
on this conversation, you putting it out there. I think that if we
It's
said right now, if every single person had a meaningful, challenging conversation about what they believed was right, what they believed was true right now, that if everybody had that conversation, that's the movement that we need. Is everybody saying, you know what? I think we ought to do this. And if more people think we ought to do that, and I'm not talking by, popular vote versus an electoral college vote. I'm talking about the straight up, agreement that at 8:00 we don't just ring bells, but that when we start moving again, we go, hey, what do you guys think about? I just think, there's these polite sort of this polite residue that you're not supposed to talk about politics, and that you're not supposed to challenge, propriety, or sort of force people's face and things. I find that to be bullshit. I think there's a way to be civil and still have the conversation.
Yeah.
I think there's a way to say, I don't know, you just haven't convinced me. This seems to, you're just missing some basic logic in all of this. Anyways, that's one person's opinion, and that's the point. Not anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I have some people that I've reached out to, inviting them to come on with me, that I know are of a different political persuasion than you, and I'm
I
wondering.
will tune in. Yeah.
I'm wondering if they will tune in and reference you, because you have an incredible way of not just telling stories, but really like articulating your point. And
It took me a long time to do it, and I thank you. Thank you. That's very flattering, and I mean that. I hope I haven't offended a single person who's looking at it from the other side. I would think that any offense to something that's just, I think meant to be positive and challenging, in a,
I don't know how anybody could actually be offended. I don't know.
That's just that's just, I think that is the definition of cynicism. When I'm just not going to listen to this person because I already had my mind made up about that.
Right. I mean, if anything, I don't understand how anybody could be offended by anything you said. Somebody might be listening and wish they could, like,
fuck you, Trump.
No, they just want to like jump into the conversation and debate. But I doubt any like rational person, I would have a hard time believing they'd be offended.
I appreciate it. I think that it's just not about partisanship or those kinds of views. To me, I think that, like Trump, love Trump, hate Trump, ignore Trump, however you look at the current political cycle, I don't think we are at a point in American history where we can point to a single individual and say that person has the power to be the problem. I don't believe that. I think that's giving that individual way too much credit. I look at that and I think, well, having a person who's, by any measure ill qualified for his job is symptomatic of a bigger issue. He is the symptom and definitely not the problem. And, whether you love him or hate him, you can say, oh, that's a positive symptom. I would imagine that, if there were, symptoms that, generally made you feel better, you wouldn't mind those symptoms as much. But you get the level.
Question for you. I hear a lot of people say, I don't really like Trump. I'm not a fan of how he conducts himself. If I was in his position, maybe I would do it differently, but I think his policies are okay, and I like him better than the other people.
Sure.
What do you think about that?
I think that's America, man. People have that right to think that way. To me, I have very little. I think that the national debate over, Donald Trump's, whether it's his decorum or whether it's his policy in terms of, sort of the bombast and the kind of, deflection and the way he, sort of conducts the business of leadership, I think that's a distraction from some of those larger questions that need to be answered.
Like,
Um, well, I mean, I think you can run the table on stuff like that. Whether or not we have an answer to just the core economic values that we want to put forward. Whether it's healthcare, and you say, is healthcare a right, or is healthcare something that needs to be sort of governed by some kind of free market solution? As far as do we profit off of sickness and death, or do we not profit off of sickness and death? Those kinds of questions are not getting airtime.
yeah, sometimes it feels like, and maybe you'll appreciate this. Sometimes it feels like we're a country without a plan right now, and maybe to borrow from your lexicon, maybe we're a country without a brand right now. Sometimes it feels like we're not really in agreement on where this ship is headed, and maybe that's just how it's supposed to go. Maybe that's part of the experiment, and I think it's perfectly normal to have a wide array of differing views and things like that. But yeah, like what are like this president or the last president, like what are we doing? And I'm not just those two, but for a long time, it might feel like, right, like I wasn't alive during the time, but like I remember a time where like we were going to connect the world with the interstate highway system, and then we were going to put a man on the moon, and we were going to innovate space technology, and like we like aligned our society around like solving these major problems. And I think I've heard a lot of people say that, like, in terms of, I remember like reading a book about happiness and personal fulfillment, and seeing another documentary that was kind of similar, that suggested that like people are happiest when they commit themselves to a larger goal, perhaps even a goal that they're unable to fulfill in their lifetime, because that's how large it is. And sometimes I wonder, like, if as a country, like we're setting our sights towards that, or we're just like bickering at the kids' table.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one, and I would say I want to pick on that brand thing a second, because I think
that term.
If we agree on brand in a more broad definition, or I think in a more sort of, we'll say, functional definition, that it's not an identity, it's not just the sort of description of a set of values, but it really is the true behaviors that sort of make America who America is, or how America is, or gets towards sort of the American concept, if you will, and it's like, yeah, this is just what it means to be America, and what it means to be American. If we're talking about that kind of sort of brand, on that brand level, then I would say the challenge, I believe, this is just a personal belief, or a personal way of looking at brand, is that we live in a time where brand has become a sort of individually curated concept. When you just look at where this will be distributed in the social space, everybody is so aggressively curating their own brands. Even advertising has started to move towards kind of putting itself in people's feeds and allowing people to embrace, this definition of, that facet of their life or their personality, etc. And I think that if you hate that idea, I get it. If you, love that idea, you're probably in the business in some shape or form. But regardless of how you feel about that, the truth of the matter is everybody is aggressively curating their own brand. And that's the backdrop in which you would say the American, brand is trying to sort of pull people together. And that's what I think partisanship's all about, is people don't want to sort of, accept kind of a delivered version of that. America isn't something that we sign up for. America is now something that we absorb into our own, sort of personal brand, in a way that is real selfish, and really, really partisan. You know what I mean? That's this notion of, I know what America is because, you know, it's part of my brand. I mean, literally, you see people wearing the flag in ways that, you know, I think, you know, 50, certainly 100 years ago would have been, you know, just considered pretty un-American. You know what I mean? Like, this is this sort of, you know, when you see people wearing, you know, flag Bermudas or something, you start to realize, yeah, what is this concept that we're trying to put forward? And I think that's it. Is I think you just have this idea of, you know, very, you know, decentralized notions of what, you know, America is trying to accomplish. And that's the struggle, I think, politically, is how do you get the majority of people to go on the record and say, we want this, we want this, we want that. You see it in, you know, California when they have referendums on things and how they're, even those things are hyper politicized. But when do we as a country, how do we as a country answer those larger questions? Because frankly, the consolidation of power, you know, it's just not reflective. You know, you can have the majority of Americans vote for one person, and you can have, you know, 2 full branches of government, or even at times 3 full branches of government that, you know, underrepresent those people, you know? So, yeah, that's a tough spot. You know, we'll call it the American experiment is going through I think a critical phase. We'll put it that way. But yeah, I feel like, you know, I don't feel like, you know, maybe one of the frustrations I have is I don't feel like either of our choices this fall are the type of leader who would really start to challenge those, you know, those premises and force the issue. And I think that's where some other campaigns, you mentioned Yang, and, you know, I probably mentioned Bernie one time at this point. I've mentioned others as well. You know, those folks that, you know, are forcing you to answer questions, or at least consider questions that you are not challenged to consider by, you know, mainstream candidates. Wow, there you go. That's what I say. I'm gonna let the record show. I'm pretty sure I just made.
Could you repeat that? Could you repeat that answer? I think the audio was bad.
Is for real? No, I can't. Everything's fine. That's all I said was everything's gonna be fine. Everything's perfectly cool.
You know, here I was. You know, we're gonna get together. We're gonna have a beer. We're gonna talk about, you know, hockey practice and record store visits, and
which we did.
We did
about an hour and a half ago.
I feel very good about that. Dude, we probably should wrap up in a second. I'm having a lot of fun though. I have one more like basic question for you.
I have a brief, crisp, non-political answer. Hit me.
Keyword answer. What are you going to do differently over the next 2 weeks that maybe you haven't done before?
Me personally, or business-wise, or
let me rephrase this question. Actually,
sure.
I didn't ask that the way I wanted to. Are you considering the momentous shift we are in the middle of right now, and everything that we just described, and how it is changing your personal rituals, your business rituals, right? And how you're responding as you look ahead to? I mean, we pontificate about what might happen in the months ahead, years ahead. If you look at a much shorter period of time, the next week or two, do you envision yourself doing anything differently, whether it be actual activity for your business, your just even things that you're thinking about differently than you normally would, even up to this point during the quarantine?
Personally, I'd like to cut back my cheese intake. That seems to have been the only thing it's the only thing I know how to cook. So there's just, you know, stupid little stuff. Like, I think in many respects, I think I just sort of felt like for the first month of this, you know, that I just sort of had to sort of self-preservation, just roll with it and do the best I could, like everybody else. And I think that now I feel like, you know what, you know, even if it lasts longer than what the most recent guess is, I think I want to start to turn outward and sort of say, yeah, now I'm going to prepare myself. You know, I feel like now I'm shifting from how am I going to deal with this, or how are we all going to deal with this, to, hey, how am I going to start to best prepare myself for whatever comes out the other side, business, personal, whatever. So I think there's some of that. Like I sort of feel like it's almost, I don't know how you'd look at it. It's just sort of, you wake up and you say, I'm deciding this is a pivot point. I think, I'm really excited about, what we're doing as a team business wise. And I would imagine that if any of my teammates can, stand the sound of my voice for as long as we've been going on and on, if they get to this point, they may disagree. I'm really optimistic that within our next couple conversations, some of the things that we've been slow cooking will start to cook and again become, or start to, boil and start to be, really the things we're able to pull down together to work on the business together. That has been the transformation. So, there's some stuff that we're going to roll out internally in terms of, just plans for the future and ways we're going to attack, everything from, individual projects to our individual careers and really the kind of collective trajectory of our little enterprise. So, I'm excited about, really, I think kind of enlisting the help of other people, to kind of, do the unstuck together.
I think that's really interesting because whether it be your desire to reduce your cheese intake or deliberately transform your business, you're essentially talking about working on you. And I was wondering if that's what that was the common denominator of everything that you just described that you might do in the next week or two is work on you. And I think what's interesting about this is I can't remember another time where the world has given all of us a better opportunity to work on ourselves. So I was curious to hear if you were going to answer.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I wouldn't have related to it that way. I think taking
but your business is you too. I mean, it's still like
no doubt, and I think that the irony, maybe the sort of poetic irony in that is that I think that business side of working on me would be, maybe becoming less reliant on my own control over the circumstances and not just, sort of inviting people into it, but really trying to advance a system where working on me is about sort of democratizing the way we are attacking, sort of business development and, starting to be a little bit more, fluid as a team and things like that. So I think what's cool about the way you've recognized it is that is working on me. And as much as anything, it's about me getting out of the way of first myself and then, the folks that I'm, in business with. So so that there's, I think that what, Kyle reminded us of at turn of year, each of us has 2,000 hours, roughly speaking, if you work a 40-hour week. And I know that everybody, probably works more than that, or lots of us work more than that. But if you just sort of average it out and said, you got 2,000 hours, what can you do with 2,000 hours? If you're in a team of 2 or of 7 or, of 20, what can you do in, 4,000 hours? Is it more than what you could do in 2 years? Yeah, I think it really is. There's this sort of sum greater than the parts thing that I think is true of more than just our business. And we look at it and say, well, what can we do in 14,000 hours of people working, towards some common goals? And I think that that's cool to say. Sounds right. But you really have to have a system for that. You really have to have a way, to sort of, kind of march in time with one another and really start to, sort of, realize how to collide at the right point, how to, sort of stay out of each other's way at other points. So if that's me, then I got to work on me. But I think that's, as much as anything, it's working on us is how I feel. I think the same thing. Family's doing the same thing. It's, working on us.
So I looked at the time and we've been on for about an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah, that's as much as I got, man.
We should probably wrap up, but not because of how much time it is, but because I feel like our conversation, like I feel good about the conversation we just had. Sure. I don't feel like, you know what I mean? We talked about a lot and it's really fun. But the point that I'm making by referencing the time is, as you were saying that, it made me look to see how much time. And I said, I've spent about an hour and 40 minutes on this. You also have spent about an hour and 40 minutes on this. If we were to completely separately spend an hour and 40 minutes on this, would it be as good as what we did together? So some greater than the parts, I think, as evident by this conversation right here.
That's America right there. America. That's all I can say.
Oh my God.
America. Yeah, that's it, man. Anyways, it's a privilege, and it's also fun, man. I'm really glad to see you. And I think the coolest.
This is my finger quotes podcast. I'm the one. I end it, not you.
You decide. This isn't over until I say the best thing that's happened in this is you telling me about your third is on the way. That's wonderful. Really, I'm thinking only happiness for you guys.
Thanks. Yeah, we're super excited. A little nervous about what it's going to mean to have a family of 5. It feels daunting.
Yeah.
We're also not going to find out. We found out for our first 2.
Oh, yeah.
Girl, then boy, and now,
you have clothes. You have clothes for both, for both genders at this point. So you're all set. You don't need to know. Now you have some fun. That'll be great. Do you have some inkling, or does sister and brother have like some inkling? Well, I mean, brother is will be the middle child. Yeah.
Brother will be middle child.
Yeah. So yeah, do either of them have any skin in the game at this point? Are they open for little brother or little sister?
Yeah. So I think my daughter will send it back if it's not a girl.
Gotcha.
She speaks in the assumptive. That she always calls it the new baby. When the new baby comes, and then she uses feminine
pronouns. Yeah, I love it.
She's gonna have this, blah blah blah, right?
Yeah.
So it's really and
power structures, man. This is all about power structures.
That's right.
There's gonna be a tilt happening here.
That's right. Tiebreaker, man.
For you guys, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, I had so much fun. Maybe we'll do this again after an appropriate amount of time has elapsed and I've had the opportunity to talk to other people.
Yeah.
I don't know how this is supposed to go. You know what I mean?
We'll wait till our data plan replenishes, I'm guessing. At some point. At some point or another.
All right. Have a great day.
That's peace and peace. See ya.
Love it. Bye.